Hello, it's Arran here at the Battle of Prestonpans Museum in East Lothian, Scotland, and welcome back to our What If interactive wargame campaign. It's time now for video log number 14, following the events from the 10th of February 1746 into early March. But before we get into the meat of what's been happening in the campaign, I do want to apologise. It has taken us a little bit of time to get round to this next stage. After running for over 6 months in real time, we did have to put a pause on the campaign because our summer season basically got so busy with events and activities and the battle's anniversary. So it seemed most sensible so that we could continue to keep track of the campaign to simply stop the clock and then restart it once we had a little bit more time again. So thank you for your patience. I hope you've not been on tenterhooks waiting for this for too long. Here at last it is. Now, in our last video, we saw the French army, which frankly wasn't sure what to do with itself, stuck down there in Kent, moving up and surprising everybody by sacking the Royal Naval Dockyard at Chatham, creating a substantial amount of damage and embarrassment for George II. But the British fleet, the Royal Navy, has been moving into the English Channel and making life difficult for any attempted French supplies, and at last the French had managed to get word successfully through to the main Jacobite army under Prince Charles Edward, which had moved into Oxford following its defeat and successful disengagement at the Battle of Sandridge. Now, after sacking Chatham, the French forces did choose to move through to link up with the Prince, and that they did, heading west, ignoring the small militia regiment was still holding on at Tonbridge. And the Jacobite force, which had been holding court at Oxford, moved down to link up with the French, which they successfully did at Reading. Now, although the Jacobite and French forces were still divided, and the British forces were more concentrated in London, our volunteers commanding the British forces decided they were not going to march out of the city to try and harass the French. Rather, they were going to concentrate on the defence of the city, consolidating the position, and actually digging in, making a network of defences that would make any approach on London now a very bloody task for either the French or the Jacobite force. So George II, for the moment, holding his fire and watching to see what the rebels might do next. So the resulting situation by the middle of February is that the Jacobites have linked up with the French forces at Reading. The Prince is still officially holding his court at Oxford, and the Jacobites are now able to consolidate, they're able to resupply, and they're able to consider with their French allies what the best course of action is now. The French are reluctant to move very far away from the south coast, where they can be supplied and reinforced, but the bad weather has been holding up any attempts by the French fleet to wrest control of the English Channel back from the Royal Navy. So our two armies, close to each other, but neither feeling strong enough to move out. In fact, it's a good opportunity, thinks the Prince, and coincidentally enough, King George II, to have a look at what forces they both have available. The conjunction of the two French and Jacobite forces at Reading is no small source of joy for the Prince and his followers. They are now able to essentially replace the losses that they'd sustained in the battle at Sandridge, that 2-day grueling engagement which had cost the lives of so many, especially of the Prince's Highlanders. Now a large force of French regulars backing up his troops. Those French regulars, though, have had a blooding too at the Battle of Tonbridge, but nevertheless they bring a considerable amount of firepower and, importantly for the Prince, cavalry as well. And so in the King's Meadow, just north of Reading, along the banks of the Thames, the Prince and the Duke hold a review of their forces so that they can assess what strength they have at their disposal. There are important considerations for the Prince. He's lost many of his Highland clan troops who were at that great shock power of the Highland Charge, and much of his army is made up now of Lowlanders and even some English regiments too. The Jacobite army, though, can still move quite a bit faster than its British army opponents. Problem is that the French cannot move as fast as the Jacobite army on its own, so there are now some important strategic discussions. Do they keep these two armies separate, or do they merge into a single, slower moving force? Since we can look down with godlike powers on the King's Meadow at Reading, we can see there are 17 regiments, full-size regiments, and 3 smaller battalions, along with 6 batteries of artillery, now that the Jacobite army has linked up with its French allies. So, when they're together, this is a considerable and powerful force, although, of course, not half as powerful it would have been had it not suffered the losses at the double battles at Tunbridge and Sandridge at the end of January. Now, despite the King's victory at Sandridge, the continuing presence of enemy forces in the south of England has not been doing George II any favours. So he's holding a review not only to assess his strength, but also to give a show of confidence and boost morale in the capital. Of course, the Hessian regiments that have been brought across and that have triumphed over the French at Tunbridge, that battle across the Thames, they are making an important contribution to the size of force available to the king, and they will be sure to play an important role in any coming campaign. Here's the king himself making a brave show of everything. He does have some of his elite regiments still intact, especially his horse guards and horse grenadier guards. They were there at the Battle of Sandridge and made important contributions in their manoeuvres, but they were held back from the hand-to-hand, so they're at full strength and could make an important contribution to the coming campaign. But George II has to protect the capital, which means he will have more troops available to him here than he might have if he's moving on to the offensive. He will always have to leave something behind in order to defend the city. So there could be a fine balance to be drawn. As he goes further along the line, George, meeting up here with his son, the Duke of Cumberland, sees that some of his battalions are actually composite battalions, survivors of earlier battles that have been drawn together, and the London-trained bands in there as well. There are a few further militia regiments scattered in the outskirts, like the one at Tunbridge, one at St Albans, but this is the field force that he has available to him, and would you believe, by pure chance, it amounts to 17 full regiments and 3 smaller battalions with 8 guns this time. So, with all their forces drawn up in review, the Jacobite and French force and George II's forces and Hessian troops are almost exactly man for man matched. So, the stalemate in the south seems set to continue. One of these two armies is going to have to either go on to the offensive or force the other one into retreat. So really it comes down to whether the Jacobites are content and able to continue coexisting so deep into potentially hostile territory, and whether George II's authority can continue while the enemy is so close and able to operate without challenge. But if the war has come to a stalemate in the south of England, things have suddenly got pretty hot back in Scotland. So let's go back up to the north and see what's been unfolding there. So time to have a look at Arran Johnston's 1720s map of the south of Scotland, and the blue triangles marking the Jacobite garrisons, Stirling, Edinburgh, Berwick and Newcastle, and the red circles marking Colonel Durand, that's the largest circle, and his force of militia at Carlisle, and the smaller circle, the new Dumfries militia, which has been raised after the news of the Jacobite defeat at Sandridge had crossed the border and given hope to the government-leaning Scots down there in Dumfriesshire. Now, as reported at the last video, Durand has decided that he's going to come north to support those new forces raised in Dumfriesshire and try and cause some trouble for the Jacobites in the south of Scotland itself. Durand successfully struck into the southwest of Scotland, linking up with the Dumfries militia, and started a march towards Glasgow. Now, Glasgow, if you can remember that far back into our campaign, was the scene of a bloody action where the Jacobites, led by Marquis of Tullibardine, had to storm the city to secure it for the Jacobites. Tullibardine is still in control of the Jacobite garrisons in Scotland, but they're pretty meagre. Most of the men had been drawn off after the bloody engagement at the Third Battle of Dunbar before the Prince's march into England, and so pretty bare-bones garrisons had been left behind. So Tullibardine, when he heard of this new threat coming towards Glasgow, he took what forces he could from the garrisons and decided to consolidate them to try and create a mobile field force, which he decided to establish at Linlithgow. The decision was put to our social media followers, as always, for the Jacobite strategic decisions, and they decided not to move on Glasgow until every available unit had gathered at the Linlithgow camp. By the time they were able to march out, therefore, especially because they were waiting for reinforcements from as far away as Berwick, Tullibardine was disappointed to discover that Glasgow had already been occupied by Durand. Not only that, but when he got there, he was able to gather a lot of locals from Glasgow and Renfrewshire to create a new regiment of militia. And so all of a sudden, there's quite a substantial British force in Glasgow. Tullibardine wisely declined the opportunity to attack a superior force in the city itself and fell back rapidly to Linlithgow. Tullibardine is under strength, there's no two ways about it. He's managed to bring a detachment from the 1st Battalion of the Duke of Perth's regiment, which was in Edinburgh, together with a detachment from the 2nd Battalion, which was in Berwick, and that gives him 2 small units. That's reinforced by the full-sized regiment that Fraser of Lovat has brought down from the north just in time for the crisis to begin. That was a newly raised unit. And by waiting here at Linlithgow and gathering more men and playing for time, basically, he's been able to add to that a small unit of Lowlanders that have come down from Aberdeenshire. And he's also waiting on a small unit, a detachment of Cromarty's regiment, Cromarty leaving half of his men to hold Fort George at Inverness, whilst the other half is rushing down to try and link up with Tullibardine and strengthen his hand. Now, having pushed the Jacobites onto the back foot, our Redcoat forces decided they were not going to directly march on Tullibardine himself. He was at the moment not able to do anything to stop them. He was massively under strength and waiting for especially Cromarty's men to come down from the north. In the meantime, Durand's men were able to start causing some serious mischief. And so the decision was taken that they would swing around into the borderlands and start threatening the Jacobite supply routes between their garrisons and, of course, the connections and communications routes back down to the Prince's main army in England. And so that's what they do. They march into the border areas. They swing round through Peebles, Selkirk. They ransack the Jacobite sympathising property at Traquair, and then they move up to threaten those crucial Jacobite communication and supply roads. Now, we're looking at Roy's military survey from about 10 years after the battle, which is an extremely detailed and very valuable map. And I'm showing you this wider view because the main road between Edinburgh and London at the time is this road here, running left to right across the screen. This is a really familiar landscape to me because I'm currently sitting around about here in the Battle of Prestonpans Museum, and the battle where Prince Charlie had first faced his enemy, Sir John Cope, in September 1745 is this area there. Now I'm going to zoom in on a different part of the map here next, because my focus for the next few minutes is going to be this part of the area, this area centred on Gladsmuir village. Gladsmuir is a very small place, as it was in the 18th century, so it be now, but it's significant for the story of the Battle of Prestonpans because the Jacobites generally referred to the battle as the Battle of Gladsmuir because of an ancient prophecy that on Gladsmuir by the sea shall the battle be. The future of Scotland was to be decided at Gladsmuir. Here it is, not a substantial place, but there's the main road running through it, a small village, a church, and a little cluster of fields. Here it is on my tabletop because our Jacobites have been using this as a very convenient supply depot, a sort of stopping off point between Edinburgh and Berwick. And this is about to get them into a little bit of trouble. Well, there's a very handsome church at Gladsmuir today, but it is not the one that was there in 1745. The one that was is actually just behind the modern church in the back of the churchyard. You can still see it there. And here it is as our Jacobite supply convoy stops off to take a bit of a break. It's not long before the alarm goes up, however, and the sentries come rushing in with news that a large force is suddenly approaching. This is a small convoy, very small garrison. Every available man has been drawn into Tullibardin's force at Linlithgow. There's not a lot of men available to secure the convoys that are ferried between the Jacobite garrisons. Very quickly, Colonel Durand brings up his forces and closes in on the Jacobite depot. There on the left are the Lancaster Blues, then there's the Glasgow militia, the Dumfriesshire militia, and the Cumberland militia, all pressing in. There's very little that these Jacobites can do to resist them. Tempted though I was to game this as a last stand, there's clearly no prospect of the small supply column being able to escape or fight its way out of this situation. And so the Jacobite supplies are surrendered. The triumphant Colonel Durand loads all of the Jacobite supplies that he can onto the Jacobites' own wagons, ready to be led away. Anything that cannot be carried is simply stacked up and burned in the fields adjacent to the church. And so, with a little convoy of wagons and prisoners, Durand heads back into the borders, having made an important symbolic statement that the Jacobites can no longer move across the landscape with impunity in the south of Scotland. Is the crisis developing now to such an extent that Tullibardin can't control it? Now, Durand's dramatic activities have taken him time, and that time has allowed Cromarty's men to come and reinforce Tullibardin at Linlithgow. Then, hearing of the raid at Gladsmuir and the near panic on the streets of Edinburgh when news is received of it, he moves from Linlithgow to the capital and then from Edinburgh out to Dalkeith. And from that position, he's able to strike east or west or south, according to whatever the enemy does. From Dalkeith, he's hopefully able to influence keeping the roads to England open, but he is still a smaller force than Durand's. Everything now depends on whether the Jacobite commanders decide that Tullibardin needs to be ordered onto the offensive. Is it worth taking the risk of moving against Durand to stop this sort of disruption happening and to prevent Durand being able to recruit more potential loyalist sympathy in the southwest? If that situation can't be contained, is it time to let the prince know that there's a real problem developing back in his rear? So the first week of March comes towards an end, and it's an unsettling situation for Charles Edward. He has managed to recover his position after the near disaster at Sandridge. He's linked up with his allies, but he doesn't find them particularly eager to move back onto the offensive and take risks. He has a large army, but perhaps not large enough now to take London. Does he go forwards or does he go backwards? And that's where we have to leave it, because we have restarted the clock. The campaign is now running in real time, and there are some important strategic decisions now to put to our voting teams. As ever, thanks for following, thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon.